Terrific.
Excellent.
Well, thanks everybody,
Excellent.
and happy Tuesday. Appreciate you all taking the time out of your day, or happy Wednesday. I don't know what day of the week it is. Appreciate you all taking the time out of your day to be with us for this training for the AARP Tennessee Speakers Bureau. We're excited to get going in earnest in 2024, and we've got some new faces and some faces that have been with us a little bit. So it's a nice mix of folks, and we're excited about it. I'm going to toss it to Byron Camp, and he is going to introduce our special guest trainer.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I've got our senior dog in the background who at weird times decides to start howling and screaming. So I apologize for that in advance. But what do you expect from old people? I mean, and with that,
Thanks, Byron.
For yourself, sir.
The hell of an intro.
With that, it's a pleasure to introduce Lenore Klein. Lenore and I met through the DWG, the DIY work group, and we both served on a subcommittee on best practices. And Lenore did a great job in being the chair of that subcommittee, and we've gotten to know each other. And I've learned that she is the head trainer, the lead trainer for Massachusetts for their Speakers Bureau. She was actually, if you go back, 4 or 5 years ago, I guess, she was in the mix of when they started their Speakers Bureau. So Lenore has been a great source of information to me, and for me helping to move our effort in creating our Speakers Bureau. So she's a lead trainer. I did offer her as much money as I could for her to move from Massachusetts to Tennessee, but unfortunately it wasn't sufficient. So, but we're very pleased that she agreed to join us today, and she's going to do us some training on presentation skills and other things that are important in relation to our Speakers Bureau. And with that, Lenore, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you. As Byron said, we've been in the DIY work group, and the purpose of that national group is to help and support speakers bureaus as they're starting. And we went through the same process in Massachusetts, from the ground up. And I really applaud all of your efforts to get your speakers bureau going and the dedication that all of you have shown. I'm going to share my screen and just share with you. Let's see. Okay, so what I'd like to do today is have really a discussion. I know that some of you have been to training before. You probably have a lot of tips. I'm going to share some of the techniques that we have used in Massachusetts, and that I've heard other speakers, other presenters use throughout the country. I definitely want to hear the ideas that you have as you move forward. And I'm going to ask you, as sort of an icebreaker, and you can put this in the chat, click the chat button and tell us what your name and where you live, and answer one of the following questions, just briefly: your hobbies or interests, types of volunteer activities you're involved with, and your favorite travel experience. So one of the three, it doesn't have to be all three, but just go to the chat and just let me know. I can see your names, in the name tiles and everything, but would love to know more about you for one of these three items. So let's take a look at the chat. And Byron, if I could have you take a look at the chat, let's see what we have so far. Going to Europe. Oh, wow. I love Europe. Traveling to the Northeast, USA. Wonderful. I know now's the time that we start to think about traveling. I myself, I love traveling. I'm going to Italy next month. Playing tennis. Oh, fabulous. I love tennis. Mount Juliet, is that in Tennessee? Absolutely. That's terrific. And now I want you to think about what you'd like to get out of the session. So also put in the chat, what's a goal that you have for today's training? What would you like to walk away with that'll be helpful to you as you do more of the presentations out in the communities? Oh, I see Nancy's put India. Definitely connecting with the audience. Oh, that's wonderful, Janice. Qualified speakers, good preparation. That is so important, Byron. To me, that's about 50% of the presentation. And we're going to go through all the steps to preparation. Being comfortable with the script, absolutely. So all of that we're going to take a look at today. And so the learning goals, which really mesh with your expectations, are enhanced presentation techniques in terms of, our own speaking ability. How can we get even better? How do we become responsive to the audience? Practice delivering a presentation. We'll have a short breakout session. We'll actually get to practice, not one of the DIY topics or one of the Speakers Bureau topics, but something that interests us, like a passion or hobby, one of those items on the icebreaker. And then discuss action plans. Where would you like to go with this? Any questions that you have of me? And then ground rules. And the DIY toolkits really they're very, very well planned, and they're very well laid out, and they do have ground rules. And just as we would do that for our audiences when we go to present, we want to make sure that everybody participates. We want to set that tone, listen when others are speaking. Please ask questions if you need clarification, respect other points of view, place electronics on vibrate or silence, and be open to giving and receiving feedback and have fun. Now, let me first ask you, most of your presentations, do you envision them being in person? Are you going to have a balance of in person or online? So anyone, Byron?
This is Rob. I would anticipate most of our presentations will be in person.
In person, yeah.
If going by the last 12 months is any indication, it'll be about 95% in person.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So really, I've structured this so it really reflects the experiences of presenting in person. And, along the way, I'll point out different things. If you happen to present virtually, there are some additional tips as well, but this is definitely geared to giving presentations in person. So we've already looked at the ground rules, your learning goals. And if we take a look at what makes it, I'm going to ask you, and you can put this in chat, or this is kind of a small group that we have today. If you just want to kind of raise your hand using the hand raise tool, or Byron, if you can see everybody, what makes a good presenter? With presentations that you've gone to before, whether they're AARP presentations or others in the field, what has stood out to you as the quality of a good presentation? Dennis? I know you've raised your hand. So you're on mute, Dennis.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I would say read the audience early and find a connection to the audience.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I noticed that somebody put that. You must have put that in the learning goals. Exactly.
Kathy has her hand up.
Kathy, yeah. Kathy, what makes a good presenter?
I think somebody who appears to know what they're talking about.
Exactly. And let me just level set at the beginning. When we all started with our Speakers Bureau in Massachusetts, we wondered, how are we going to learn these DIYs? They're so chock full of information. It's really a process over time. We're not going to become completely expert, but the more and more you do it, the more comfortable you feel. So there's a lot of preparation for this.
We have Collier made another comment.
Collier, yeah.
Someone who does not read the presentation when it is being projected behind them.
Exactly. Yeah, you want to face, if you're using PowerPoint, you want to be able to face the audience. And because the primary thing that you want to do to connect with the audience is really engage them. So of course, you want to be well organized and prepared, and that has to do with really knowing the script. And then demonstrate, as you said, demonstrate knowledge of the topic. Stay focused on the goal and contents. And fortunately, the DIYs are structured so that it takes us every step of the way. We have a game plan. We have a map in front of us provided by the creators of the DIY. Engage the audience and encourage participation. And I'll show you some ways that you can use open-ended questions to really, really get the audience to chime in and become part of the whole process. Inclusive and open, making sure that we as presenters are listening and that everybody, and you've set that in the ground rules, make sure that everybody adheres to that. Has effective verbal and nonverbal delivery, animated, eye contact, a good voice tone, and believe me, we'll go over that as well. One of the things that we remember as presenters of DIY topics is that AARP is nonpartisan, we're not judgmental, we're not taking one stance over the other, we're remaining neutral. And then manages the time and summarizes. Being able, if you're asked, for instance, to give a 30-minute or a 60-minute presentation, that we stick to the time allotted. And also be able to manage challenging situations. And my contention is that if you're able to engage the audience, it sort of minimizes the chances of any kind of audience disruption. So now I just want to review some of the presentation skills that I'll go over in terms of adding that to your toolkit. Byron, you mentioned preparation. Absolutely. It reduces your speaking anxiety. You're well-versed with the script. You've rehearsed enough in advance. And we always advocate, and we do this in Massachusetts, going out with a peer, sort of co-facilitate for your first couple of presentations. Introducing the topic, you're able to really engage from the very beginning. And we'll go through techniques for that. And then after you've engaged people from the beginning, you maintain interest and engagement throughout the presentation. Managing time and questions. We love to get questions, but time flies. And before you know it, you're at 60 minutes and you haven't covered some of the points of the presentation. So we'll go over techniques for that. And then verbal and nonverbal delivery, how important that is. And definitely if 90% of your presentations are going to be in person, I'll show you some techniques to really make sure that you're animated and lively. So let's look at preparation, knowing your audience. And I think, Dennis, you said being able to read the audience. How do you prepare for the audience that you will have? What are the different methods? And anybody, if you want to chime in or raise your hand, how are you going to know that audience you're presenting to? What can you find out beforehand? Because a lot of this is some upfront work. You know, when you are assigned, when you volunteer to speak at a particular site. Collier, ideas from you? Oh, you're on mute, Collier. Collier, if you could unmute yourself.
Yes, ma'am. Got it. Okay. So, I mean, part of it is exactly what you're saying. You know where you're going. Are you going to a school? Are you going to a college? Are you going to where there are people, shall I say, that are of an age such as us? All three of those are going to have different levels of sort of a worldview. And once you get that, then you can think about, oh, I can reference TV references from the 50s with my group, but that's not going to fly in an elementary school or even a college, probably. So
Yeah.
that's the thing, knowing that body of the audience.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, we're serving the 50 plus community. And to your point, if you find out if people are still working, say they're 50 to 65, they're still working. You know, we find this with the Social Security presentations. We need to kind of tailor what we say and find references that are going to be relevant for this audience. If they're 50 to 65 versus 70 plus, you're going to want to be able to spotlight and highlight different information. You know, with our Prepare to Care, we try to find out that information. Do we have younger caregivers? You know, people who are 50 to 60 who are working and taking care of their parents. It's a little different conversation than, you know, a 65 plus. We're finding that with the younger caregivers, they may want to engage their children to be part of the caregiving team. With older folks who are taking care of spouses, they may want to involve their children and grandchildren. So it's really great to find that out beforehand. I would say practice, practice, practice. Time the presentation beforehand, and amongst yourselves, you can arrange either through in person or virtually, you can meet to rehearse a presentation beforehand. If you're co-presenting, who's going to do what piece? How do you time it? I say practice in front of friends and family, tape yourself. You can go on Zoom and you can practice, and then watch the recording. It's pretty daunting, but it really gives you a heads up as to, you know, the points that, a way to know that you're hitting the main points. Byron, you've raised your hand.
Yes, I'm in preparation. We have a script
Mhm.
and we have a PowerPoint, and we're now standing in front of 25 people ready to do this presentation. You know, how do you, what's the way that you read the script in such a, how do you read it in such a way that your audience feels that you're not just standing there reading them a book?
Exactly. Well, one of the things that you can do is to put and there's a way to do this. You can put the presentation in speaker notes view, and that involves, you know, some amount of technology. And it's important to know the technology that you're going to have when you go out there. If you have the PowerPoint behind you, and you can arrange the laptop so that you're looking at the speaker notes and the audience is seeing the PowerPoint, then you have a reference point. I've seen people do it with cards, just sort of jotting down main bullets. So that's an excellent question. And it's really by rehearsing a lot. And I can't stress enough the idea of co-presenting. So each person has their own piece, but there is a way that you can put the PowerPoint and speaker view in front of you at the laptop without having to look behind you, because, you know, what somebody said today, you don't want to do the present, look at the screen the whole time, you know, so you can arrange to do that. And it brings up a good point about arriving early to the presentation site. You know, when we accept a speaking assignments in Massachusetts, we have each of our speakers call the host site, you know, 3 or 4 weeks beforehand. What technology do you have? Do you have a projector? Do you have a laptop? What do we need to bring as presenters? And you get a pretty good feel of, you know, the equipment that they have, and then plan for the technology and resources. And you can rehearse beforehand. You can practice getting those speaker notes on. Dennis?
You know, a lot of times, I'm sure everybody has had that experience. If you've had a speaker in front of you behind a podium or in front of a PowerPoint slide, there's one style of delivery. As soon as you step away from that podium and begin to engage your audience, you become more of a conversational speaker.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you know the script and you know your talking points, you can address almost any question in the audience and feel like it's more of a one-on-one delivery instead of you just spewing information and hoping that they retain it.
And you hit an important point, because we want to harness the full value of being in person. And what I like to do is set up a horseshoe shape. And this gets to making sure the room is set up appropriately. I love a horseshoe shape rather than just sort of rows, because then I can move around. And when we get to the nonverbal part, I'll give you some techniques for how you, as Dennis said, how you move around and engage. I have seen speakers, and sometimes I do this, I take the major points, I really rehearse, and I rehearse with Speakers Bureau partners. And I put the main bullets on a 3x5 card on one side only. And that's when I'm starting out. And people don't mind that at all. They understand. And I've seen that done very effectively, so that you have your major speaking points, and then you sort of go to the next card. You put that, in the deck, and you go to the next card. So you want to make sure that the room is set up appropriately, create a comfortable and welcoming space. And that's why I like to get to arrive at the presentation. Maybe this is over budgeting my time, but about an hour and a half. And this is after I've called ahead to find out what technology they have. We often say the only surprise is no surprise, because sometimes when we think all is going well, there's, you don't have a laptop connection, or you don't have a USB cord or something. So I would make sure all of that's in place to reduce our anxiety, and arrive early, get a sense of moving about the room. Set up your PowerPoint, go through the PowerPoints before you start presenting. And arriving early allows you to greet participants as they arrive. And that's the way I always like to develop a rapport with people, use their names, and then, it creates a comfortable environment and people feel like engaging with you. Any other points to that? I think you've all hit on terrific points. Let's see if there's anything else on the chat. So after you've prepared, one of the things, and Collier, you really spoke to it, you have a lot of experience in the room. With adults, we really need to treat people with respect for their experience and the knowledge that they have. You may have folks who've been caregivers, and that's why I like to, like in the caregiving presentation, how many of you are caregivers? How many of you have, had experience with fraud, or been a victim of fraud? So really read the room. I love that, to find out the particulars about the audience before you get there. People need to have a desire to learn. They must see the connection between the information you're giving them and a way that they can apply it when they go back to their daily lives. People learn best through utilizing experience. I would use and acknowledge people's contributions. As I said, people have a wealth of experience. If people have something to add, an experience that they have found very useful for them, I think that's very important. And people need to participate. Perhaps at the beginning of the DIY, you say, well, gee, what would you, here are the main points of the agenda. What would you like to learn? What else can I cover today for you? So you feel that they're getting you involved. Yes, Collier, you have another point.
Let me make a comment. I was a criminal defense lawyer for longer than I should have been. But one of the things when you have to ask or want to ask somebody to talk about something that may be, well, in fraud, people are ashamed and embarrassed when they get scammed.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I started doing when I was talking to jurors is, do you have a friend or a relative? Put it off on somebody else that you know of has been scammed or whatever has happened. And that way it's not a personal thing that they're confessing in front of the whole crowd. It gives them an out.
Good point. I should add to that Dennis Hohengasser, who was our lead fraud expert and our lead speaker in Massachusetts, he relates an example, a personal story of being scammed himself. So it kind of level sets. He answered, he clicked on a thing for a gift card and he lost a couple of $1,000 and he didn't realize, we've all had those experiences, but I can see, Collier, your point. Really, you don't want to put people on the spot. If you have a story, this happened to me a couple of weeks ago. I clicked on something. I said, oh, what have I done? If the speaker can relate that personal experience, it personalizes them to the audience. And we all have different learning styles. That's why we have PowerPoint, visual. People need to see things, auditory. That's why I always say during the presentation, repeat the main ideas so that people who learn a lot by listening and verbalizing, they get to hear it. And kinesthetic, have people asking questions. So beginning the presentation, that's where you start to really engage the audience, develop rapport. Naturally, we want to be flexible. You know, if people are fighting traffic, we want to wait a couple of minutes for them to arrive. And then introduce yourself as the presenter and your role. And there's a whole piece at the beginning of each of the DIYs saying that, you know, I have studied, I've given this presentation before, I'm experienced, I'm not an expert per se, you know, on Social Security. I haven't worked for the administration or anything, but I really want to convey the information from AARP and I'm willing to take questions. Dennis. You're on mute, Dennis.
I don't know why I trip myself up with that every time. You bring up a good point, you know, as a speaker, bureau presenter, you aren't just often making a presentation as a standalone. You may be invited to a community or a civic organization where you are, you know, you go through the Pledge of Allegiance, you go through business meetings, and you are the guest speaker. You might be 3/4 to 2/3 of the way through the meeting. So you aren't necessarily showing up at 1 o'clock, giving an hour presentation and leaving. You may be showing up at 1 o'clock and your presentation really doesn't start until almost 2.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And you are compartmentalized based on what is available for the civic organization you're presenting to, how much time is left, whether it was a lunch hour or an afternoon meeting. You have to be flexible. So always be prepared to present the key findings of your presentation and then expand if you are able.
Yeah, great point. I mean, you may be asked at a dinner. One of the things that is really a challenge is going to a dinner meeting and you're last up and everybody has a chance to go. You know, starting out with a humorous story, an anecdote, personalizing yourself to the presenter, to the other folks in the room, as well as your co-presenters. And here's where you really can take the script. I know, Byron, you talked about, gee, how do you learn that script? If you make it your own, you know, a lot of folks who are coming through the training ask, well, gee, can I write my own? Well, AARP has provided some pretty fabulous scripts for us to use, where you can inject your own element and your own personal spin on it, is to tell a personal story or experience, interesting statistics, quotation, and anecdote. I like to use open-ended questions. For instance, for caregiving, how many of you are caregivers? And you get a sense of folks in the room who have that experience. So starting off really by letting folks know who you are, I think is very, very critical. And then, of course, you have it in the script, the objectives, purpose of the session, and the ground rules are going to be very important in terms of people listening to each other. So during the presentation, you want to build on the momentum that you've started during the introduction. Again, the DIYs are structured so that you have a logical structure. Continue to use personal stories and experiences to highlight key points. And in thereby, you encourage other folks to share their personal experiences. But, you know, to Collier's point, we don't want to put people on the spot, only if folks are comfortable doing that. And I like to repeat main ideas several times. And what I do in the caregiving presentation is, you know, I do kind of an internal summary. Now that we've discussed putting together or starting the caregiving conversation, let's look at forming your caregiving team. So you want to have a link from one piece of the presentation to the other. Again, open-ended questions, the who, what, where, when, and hows. What are your thoughts and ideas? What do you think? What's your experience been? It really gives you a lot of information about the participants, and it's a way of engaging them. Again, the transitions to key points, it helps to refocus the audience. And for those auditory learners who need to hear it, you know, it really, really makes a lot of sense if they can have the information reinforced. And in the conclusion, you're going to review the main points, referring back to the session objectives. So I don't know how many of you have been to Toastmasters or know about that organization. It's a public speaking organization, and they always say 3 major points to a presentation. Tell people what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And people walk away from the presentation really remembering the key points, and they're better able to kind of integrate the information with their personal goals. So any questions? I see some items in the chat. Yeah, about reading the presentation. So I think that asking these open-ended questions gives you time as a presenter for a breather so that you don't feel that you have to read everything. Managing time, as I said before, the 30 minutes or the 60 minutes can get away from us. So what I like to do for managing time is, again, flexible on the start time, make sure you end on time, encourage people to make their comments brief and move on as required. If you're getting a lot of questions, we certainly want to let people know that they can ask questions. We want to manage expectations at the beginning and let people know, now I'm going to present for 45 minutes, and then for 15 minutes, I'll allow questions. If there isn't enough time for the questions, have people write it on a Post-it note. Or if you have an easel with chart paper in the room, have a parking lot, have people post their questions on that. But you want to make sure that you can get through their presentation and let people know, gee, I'd love to answer your questions, but I want to make sure that I get through the material. I like to place a small clock near your standing point, or what has worked very effectively, it is if you're co-presenting, to have a timekeeper. Have that person be very, very diligent on time and give you a high sign when you've reached a certain point. And again, determine how long you'll spend on the presentation and how long on questions. Additional items for managing questions, as I said, set expectations at the beginning of the presentation for how you'll handle them. I think the general rule that we usually follow is like 45 minutes of a presentation. Write down your questions, and then I'll take them for 15 minutes. For the longer presentations, we find that, with some of our longer Social Security presentations, we'll stop at a certain point and allow maybe 5 minutes for questions, because that's a lot of dense information to get through. So we'll stop at a certain point, we'll allow 5 minutes for questions, then we'll go on to the next piece, and then for the time remaining, we'll answer any final questions. And then we love to see enthusiastic audiences, but if they start to ask too many questions or personal stories, refocus, saying, gee, I really want to be able to move on. And one of the most important things that we can tell anybody is that if you can't answer a question, be honest that you're not an expert in the topic. Offer to have somebody get back to them. So there's a diplomatic way of letting people know, love your question. I think it's really on point. I want to get you the best answer possible. So let me take your name, and we'll have somebody, you refer it to the state office. Maybe there's a staff person who can answer that particular question. So we want to get away from, well, Jay, I don't know the answer to that. So I think we want to encourage people. If we can't answer it, we're not expected to be, the end all be all of this topic. Any questions on that? And then nonverbal communication. I don't know if this is a surprise to you, but 93% of our total communication is body language and tone of voice. There were studies done at the University of California back in the 60s. Dr. Alfred Mehrabian did a study that said, no matter what you say, no matter what the words are, if you're not presenting in a lively, interactive manner, I think, Dennis, you were talking about this, moving around the room, folks are less likely to believe your words. So let's start with the words. Of course, we want to use precise language. I always say, AARP will give us the verbiage to use in the presentations, but we want to make it conversational. And the way we can do that, as we said before, is to ask a lot of questions, is to make sure that you're establishing eye contact. Go on to gestures. Please feel free to use gestures in the classroom. I love to watch the newscasters because they kind of use, you can see they use their hands to say, well, okay, now let's get to, I don't know if you can see this, or I can stand up a little bit, but now let's get to the next point. I know during COVID, a lot of the broadcast presenters were doing virtual newscasts, and they would stand up and you could actually see them use their gestures. Facial expressions, eye contact, doing what I call a figure eight, looking around the room, establishing eye contact with everybody in the room. I think that's so important. An animated facial expression, that is so important, particularly if somebody's asked a question or they've given a personal story or a main point. I think that's critical. Posture, really making sure that we're standing up straight, that we're relaxed. It doesn't have to be rigid. Movement, and this is where I think we can add a lot of dynamic elements to our presentation. We can move around the room. You know, as you go from one point of the presentation to the other, you can take a step forward, you can move to the side. Now let me talk about the caregiving, forming a caregiving team. Now that we've covered that, I might move to the side. Now let's talk about some of the challenges of being a caregiver. So you can use your physical presence to establish that kind of a nonverbal punctuation to add some dynamic qualities. So movement is really important. Mannerisms. Sometimes we're not aware of jiggling change in our pockets or flicking a ballpoint pen. So it's good to be aware of those kinds of things. Tone of voice, the pitch, the inflection that we use. How many of you are familiar with the Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the vignette of the clip of the history teacher? It's the show of hands. Yeah, very boring history teacher who talks in a monotone tone of voice and puts the kids to sleep and everything. So we want to make sure that we have variety in our voice, that we're speaking at a volume that is audible, that we have that we speak at a rate of speed that is comfortable for the participants. I like to slow down in introducing a topic. Now let's talk about the first pillar of brain health, and then you can speed up your voice after that. But I think variety is really key to that. Avoid fillers. One of the things they have in Toastmasters is they have somebody called an ah counter, so that they sit in the back of the room, they observe the presenters and how many times they say, you know. It's natural, we all do it, but it's good to be aware of that. Any other points to add here? Enunciation, also pronouncing, the key about the speed of our voices is that if we slow down enough, we'll be able to enunciate. I've gone to a lot of presentations where people talk so quickly, I don't understand everything they've said. So enunciation is very, very important. Anything from your experience to add to the whole notion of body language?
Well, I'll second your comment about jingling change. It drives me wild. I've sat behind people who were arguing to juries and they had their hands in the pockets. And what that did for me was I did not go to the podium with a pen, or if it was a stick pen that you're not going to click, and I dumped everything out of my pockets so that I did not have the option to jingle my car keys or change. The other thing about speed is you see people that are speeding, and I get the feeling that they're frightened to death and they want to get a horrible thing as fast as they can. And so making yourself slow down relaxes you, and I think relaxes your audience. And then, like you say, then you can speak more distinctly about what you're doing. That would be my comment.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that it goes back to rehearsing, it goes back to practice, making sure that you've done all the preparation, that you get feedback. And we're going to do that in a couple of minutes, is give each other feedback. Yeah, so important, Collier. Just
Yeah,
enough.
it's just Rob, if there's one thing I could add on that, in terms of speed,
Mhm.
I think we all feel like we're talking at normal pace, and it sounds to the audience kind of like we're racing. And when you slow down, personally, it always feels like I'm talking like this, but it feels that way, but it doesn't sound that way, if that makes sense. If it's almost uncomfortably slow for you, it's probably right perfect for the audience. It's just a hard thing to trust. And like you say, it helps to kind of record a practice session and really get a sense of the pace in which you deliver content.
Yeah. And some of the most effective speakers and presenters I've seen use pauses. At the end of a major section of a presentation, they kind of, okay, any questions? And they pause before starting the next topic. So that could be used very, very effectively. Just some nonverbal tips, facial expressions. If you are presenting on camera, of course, look directly at the camera. Again, speak clearly, vary the pitch, speed, and volume during a transition, and you can practice that with friends and family. And if you're on video, sit tall and don't slouch. Challenging behaviors. We hope this it's not going to happen. We already talked about how to handle a tough question. I'll get you the answer. Thank you very much for the question. Sometimes we do have people who try to monopolize. They think they know it all. Oh yes, I have experience in that, and what I find, and they're very well meaning. However, if we allow that person to take over, we lose control of the session. Distractors, people who go off on tangents. They talk about other topics, things that are not relevant. Resistors, I don't agree with those statistics. How did you arrive at that? Or they may not want to be there. And then side conversations, which could happen in live presentations. And the way we have of what I would recommend for the over talkers is say, gee, we've been hearing primarily from one or two people. I'm also interested in hearing what other people have to say. And at the beginning, you can remind people of ground rules. Everybody participates. And you can remind people, remember we set those ground rules? Well, it'd be great. I know, Jack, you've made some wonderful contributions. I want to hear what other folks have to say. Distractors, go refer back to the session goal. That's not within the scope of this presentation. I'll stay after, and if you want to talk about that or write it down, and we'll get you the answer to that. But I really want to make sure that I cover all the material in the time allotted. Resistors, don't take it personally. Don't argue. People aren't necessarily angry at you. They just may be having a difficult time navigating, let's say, Social Security or a particular topic. Listen and acknowledge that you hear their comment. I think we really need to say thank you for your contribution. Thank you for that. That must be difficult. And I think that will calm people down. And if you establish that rapport at the beginning of the session and really let people know that you always value people's contribution, they'll understand that you want to get back on track and finish the presentation. Side conversations, that's where you can use movement. And if you see a couple of people talking, they could be talking, they could have a question about your presentation. They could be so engaged that they have a question for you, or they could be talking about the latest basketball or football scores or the weather. So I think if you go up to them, gee, do you have any questions? And do it in a very, very calm tone of voice. I think they'll, desist or stop having those side conversations. What else have you encountered in terms of possible challenging situations with presentations that you may give? Any other comments? Okay, well, hopefully, if you've done the prep and you've contacted people and you establish that rapport, you won't have those things happen. So we want to quickly, do folks have a little extra time? Because I think, well, why don't we time this for like 10 minutes? And how many folks do we have, Dennis? We have 10 participants. Why don't we go into, how about three breakout rooms? Could we do that? 3 people a room, one room is going to have 4.
We have 3 breakout rooms ready.
3, oh, wonderful. So what I'm going to ask you to do, and this is a fun type of experience, think about, again, as we saw at the beginning, think about that trip to Europe or an interest you have or a volunteer experience. Talk about that for 2 minutes. One person can volunteer to go first. Oh, we're not ready to start yet. I want to explain the, can we hold off
Trying.
and just, okay. You can close all rooms. Okay, can everybody still hear me? And after you've given your presentation, you can decide on the order, reflect on what you did that you enjoyed, that really, really went well. Well, I think I was really descriptive. I told a great story. And one thing you might change for the future, and then have your observers give you a piece of feedback. Gee, I love that story. I think that's really going to go, that would be great in telling a group. And then some suggestions for one thing I might do differently, and then you rotate to the next person. So a one, not even a 2 minute, a 1 to 2 minute presentation, and then, reflect on what you did. And gee, I think this really went well. I might change this, and get reaction from your partners, and then switch to the next person. So Byron, you have a question.
So Dennis, you missed me. Put me in room 3, please.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions about that? And make sure that you stick to the time. You might have your observers, if you're not presenting, give you the high sign at maybe 1.5 minutes for your presentation. So you present, you get feedback, and then you move on to the next person. So why don't we meet back in the room at 4 o'clock? How does that sound?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
4 Eastern, 3.
3 Central, yeah.
3, okay, yes, 3.
Are we
Okay.
ready?
3 Central. Okay, so we'll open all rooms. Lovely, and we'll see you back in the main room. Thank you.
What a great group of individuals.
Well, Pamela, why don't you start first?
Oh, my Pamela today? Okay.
Yes, you are.
I will rename myself here.
Okay. No, I think you're rather cute. Scout, my dog is yapping.
So I think the presentation's been pretty good.
Yes.
So Barry, talk about something that you want to talk about for 2 to
Okay,
3 minutes.
talking about trips and stuff. Pam and I just got back from one. We were gone from the last few days of February till about the 9th of March. We went to Tulum in Mexico. Tulum's on the peninsula on the East Coast, and it's about 75 miles south of the big resort areas and stuff. We went first to Tulum in 1990. They had not unearthed the Mayan ruin there at that time. It was very sparse. There were 4 hotels there, and that was it. They were all on the beach. They were separated by probably a quarter of a mile from each other. We went back in about 2010, 20 years later, and they had not only unearthed the ruin, they found 6 outbuildings. They completely redid those, made it a big lawn area, made it a huge tourist place to visit and stuff. And to see everything. Now there are about 150 hotels there. It was pretty major. So we went back this spring. There are about 300 hotels there now. They're all on the beach. They're every 2 hotels is a little boutique shop. So it's filled with shopping. It's filled with things. It's packed. It's a huge tourist area. We stayed right next to it, a little town called Akalum. But we had a great time there and saw everything. It was very interesting how big it's become. There is Costco there, there's Sam's, there's the largest superstore, market, grocery store, whatever you want to say, that I've ever been in my life. It was 50% bigger than the biggest stores I've ever been in. They sold everything, everything you could imagine. They had their own dispensary of wine and stuff. For 35 cents, you could get a taste, or 35 pesos, you could get a taste. For 55, you could get 2 ounces. For 85, you could get 4 ounces, a regular glass of wine. But it was very interesting. On the checkout, I walked over to the kind of the general offices area in one corner and realized that it was surrounded by about 65 motorcycles. Everybody travels on these small motorcycles, 150 cc and less. Everybody under 30 or 40 years old, that's how they get around. People don't
3
have
seconds.
So it was very interesting. On the way back, flying out of Cancun, I was on a 787, and they said, "Oh, next time you'll have to fly into Tulum." And I said, "Tulum?" And they said, "Yeah, we have just built a new airport there." And then I realized it isn't just a little airport for people to fly into. It's an airport for 787s. So,
Very good.
Wow.
Interesting.
So
There we go. Shall I go next?
Yes.
Sure. I noted about going back to Europe. Michelle and I were fortunate to go twice. The first time we actually toured in Ireland and Scotland and England. And on that trip, we generally use Airbnb, and we do it very improvisationally in that the only thing we have booked when we leave is where we're going to land, a place to stay there that night, and a place to stay the night before we fly back home. So everything else in between is just, oh, we're going to go up here. We better call around and find a place to stay. And we travel very improvisationally. In England, we were driving along, and here's a little sign on the side of the road for Beatrix Potter's house, you know, who wrote the bunny books, for lack of a better expression. So we go cooling down that road, and we go through this little town, and we don't see anything that makes sense. But we stop this woman who's jogging beside the road. She says, "Oh, you just went past the museum." Well, so we turn around and go back and chat up some guy who was painting something, ironwork or something. "Oh, yes, here's the museum right there. But they're having a wedding today, and so the museum is closed." Well, crud. And he said, "But there's a little garden." So he went through the garden, and it has little statues of rabbits and stuff, and that was cute. And somebody says, "But you can see her house from across the river." Well, how do we get there? We'll go down this way. And I love England. They have the least sense of possession, right? Meaning they put up walls so their sheep stay where they're supposed to stay, but you can walk and you go through people's backyards. It's just the wildest thing. So we're walking down this road, and it turns into a driveway, and the driveway turns into a path. And we see the sign that says, "Not here. I'm a sycamore," in front of this tree. Well, isn't that odd? And you walk a little further, and it says, "Nope, it's not me. I'm an ash." And you walk a little further, and you come to the Burnham oak. Remember in Macbeth, when Burnham Wood comes to Dunsinane? Well, I'm a bit of a Shakespeare scholar. Well, I'm just beside myself. Holy crap. It's Burnham Wood that I've read about since I was in high school. And sure enough, across the river, there's Big Trick Spotter's
30
house.
seconds.
So that's kind of how we travel. A lot. It drives my sister wild. She wants to know exactly where she's going to eat, where she's going to sleep, and we're just up in the air, whatever, come what may. All right,
Very good.
Ag, you're it.
I guess my turn. Well, travel is not something that we out of the US that we do, because my wife likes to be in control and she hasn't learned yet how to fly a plane or how to navigate a boat. So travel isn't really in our, except within the United States, going to the location where our three sons happen to live. So I'm going to talk about something else in relation to what's happening with in Wilson County. There's an effort that's going on that's been identified that has to do with grandparents raising grandchildren. And I happen to get involved in this effort, if you will, because I volunteer for an organization that was created by Judge Barry Tatum, who is the Wilson County judge for juvenile court. And he decided that he would like to see kids have help earlier in their life as opposed to them showing up in his court. So with his effort, he helped create this opportunity for mentors such as me to be with middle school kids. So I'm in my second year of being a mentor for a 6th, 7th, or 8th grade student to help them, be an extra support for them, so that we do activities. We went. The mentors went.
30 seconds left.
Thank you. Went to the Nashville Capitol, and we had a tour and did all those kind of things. We have some other things that are coming up as well. So, but because of that effort, the person who is the director of this group also works with foster care, and because of that, she has come up with identified that the need is there for grandparents raising grandchildren.
Oh, we got cut off. Anyway, go see the film Origins. How was that? I know it was quick, but tell me about how that went. How was your experience, and how would you translate that to giving DIY presentations? And so we'll just open it up for discussion.
Yeah, I thought it was very helpful.
In what way? What were some of the helpful?
Well, first of all, self-realization in that I was not prepared and that I needed a lot of work. I forgot to introduce myself, and there were all kinds of bloopers.
What did you do? What was a positive feeling that you had that you did well, a piece of the presentation you did well?
I think that I explained what SHIP is, and that it's a state health insurance assistance program. And I think that I did impart some knowledge of that, and it helps people with Medicare.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's excellent. Yeah. What about other things that you found? What was the experience like?
For me, I was totally unorganized and rambled and did not complete what I wanted to say in the time that we had. So I have a lot of work to do.
Well, this is, Nancy and I were talking about this. This is off the cuff. I mean, we didn't have any time to prepare this, but it was more spontaneous, But what is something that you did well that you were pleased with, Byron?
I guess what I was pleased with is the topic that I talked about.
Mm-hmm. We find passion in things that interest us. And I always say that you can transfer that passion to giving DIY presentations, whether it's the caregiving or brain health. And we have people, we tell people in Massachusetts for our Speakers Bureau, do something you're comfortable with, that you know, that you feel that you have some background in, which isn't to say that you can't grow and take on other. We've seen other people, you know, presenters who start with caregiving go over to fraud and go. Once you start feeling comfortable, we don't want to overload people with different topics. Once you start feeling comfortable delivering a DIY, then you're curious, well, gee, how would I do with some of these other presentations? And the more you practice and the more you confer with other people who have experience, the better you are. Any other experiences? I enjoyed listening to Nancy, and we talked about the issue of time. How do you know if you have enough time, if you're running out of time? The scripts that we get, the DIY facilitator notes, have times to them, allotted to them. And I always love to have a timekeeper, you know, and, you know, we did talk about if the audience is asking too many questions or interjecting too much, we can always say, gee, love your contributions, but I want to make sure I get back to the material. So if you're co-presenting, appoint that person, your co-lead, you know, you can be each other's timekeeper.
Yeah, we have talked about this, and Rob and I have, you know, are, and with many of the folks who are here today, that our goal is to always have two people who will go out for what any speaker engagement that we have, because of what for the reasons you've talked about today, Lenore. So we feel it's really important.
Yeah.
You know, further to that, I think we found it's, you know, it's unfair sometimes. And I know some of you have been run solo before, to kind of throw people out in a situation where like it's just you left to figure it out. So that's part of our learnings, and we've had some growing pains along the way, but figuring out that, you know what, it's going to work a lot better if we have multiple people who, you know, whenever we can. It won't always be perfect, but whenever we can, to kind of be able to tag team a presentation.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Barry, I want to say hi.
Hello.
Hi. As people have joined, you know, after we started. So I want to thank all of you for your great participation, all the wonderful points that you made. And I just want to sort of go around the screen and find out from you what a golden nugget was, a highlight, something. I know we had talked, I asked you to put down your learning goals. You know, it was around the preparation and engaging with the audience. So why don't we start with Dennis? What's a highlight for you of our today's session?
I would say remembering that I'm on mute.
Yeah. Rob, a highlight for you.
Yeah, a highlight for me is, you know, is really getting a feel for, you know, I was in a group with Janice and Kathy, and Dennis popped in. Just the fact that, you know, I think the one thing that we all bring to this table is that we're all really good, really strong storytellers, right? So we can tell a story. And as long as we can take that focus into a story about fraud, or a story about Social Security, or a story about caregiving, I think that transition becomes a lot easier into the presentation topics. But there is no loss for ability to tell a story in this group, and that always excites me, especially when we meet in person, because I love to hear stories.
Oh,
you know, whether it's about quilting or crocheting, or Nancy going to India, or whatever it might be.
I know. Yeah. It really does. It gives you a lot of power as a presenter. It personalizes you to the audience. You establish that rapport by sharing some of yourself, and particularly around your experience with the topic. Janice, what's a highlight for you today?
Just getting the chance to hear everybody else be silly in a minute and a half or two.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Talk about, I chose a topic that I did not think anybody really was interested in, but tried to make it a little more interesting by telling a story, not just how I learned how to crochet, but I mean, why I learned how to crochet. So,
That's incredible. Thank you. Byron, highlight for you.
Um, having you do this
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
is greatly appreciated. No, I think you've covered a lot of points that um, that are critical to being successful in presenting a DIY and being knowledgeable about, so now it's going back through and spending the necessary time to do the practice, so that we are presenting, that we truly represent AARP and
Mhm.
being the face of AARP, if you will, and doing the practice to go out and to do that. So thank you.
Okay, sure. Nancy, what's a highlight for you?
I have to echo Byron from the standpoint of hearing you and your expertise, and the some of the pointers that you have given us, especially about getting a feel for the audience, and some of the other key things that I maybe wasn't keeping in the forefront of my mind. I would like to do, but it wasn't in the forefront, such as arriving early and using the horseshoe shape
Yep.
setup versus maybe just accepting what they have put together as rows. So set the room up so that it feels comfortable for me.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. Kathy, what's going to a highlight you're taking away?
I think just the way that you presented things, I think that it was a good example of giving a presentation. And thank you very much for
Oh,
doing that.
you're so welcome. Yeah. Barry.
I was, I think the best part of what we did today was to have our breakout groups. I really like to take part in these things, not just kind of sit back and hear the lecture. So, and I was also interested in Rob's comment about storytellers. The ones I know in this group are all storytellers, including myself. And it took me a long time to realize that was probably the greatest thing I ever got from my father. My father
That's
was an
wonderful.
unbelievable storyteller.
Ah, that's terrific. That's such a rich, background that you have there. Yeah. Collier, thank you, Barry.
Well, I'm going to echo the concept of that horseshoe shape, because so many times people are trying to incorporate both sides of the room, and it ends up looking like you're watching a tennis match. They will go from end to end, you're whipping from side to side. I thought that was great. And then I was happy that I could tell a story in less than 2 minutes. That may be a record for me.
Yeah, yeah. Excellent. Wonderful. Well, I've learned, so I always learn more from, folks who come to these sessions, that I'm able to impart to you. But I really appreciate I love the enthusiasm and the momentum that you've started. And Rob and Byron, thank you for inviting me today. And it was great to meet all of you.
Same here.
Thank you. It was
Oh.
nice hearing what you had to present for us today.
And Lenore,
Thank you.
we're grateful to have your expertise here at our Tennessee table. And if you won't consider moving here, at least we can have you at the table virtually, and we're appreciative of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. I kind of, Nancy
We have
gave
4 seasons, but not deep snow.
That's right. That's right. I know. And Nancy actually gave the intro to Movies for Grown-Ups, so I might be tempted to go. It was so great. It was so terrific. Yeah.
Okay, Byron, I think we can put enough money together from all of us to get her down here.
So fund the account.
Oh, boy. Well, thank you. You've been terrific. So please feel free. Byron has my contact information if you have any questions. And you have Rob and Byron, you have the PowerPoint slides if you want to share that with everybody. with
Yeah,
the
I think
notes.
we'll share that, and then the recordings for folks who weren't here to watch, and certainly if folks want a refresher who are here as well. I just want to, I guess, close with some next steps. I think what we'll go from here is setting up similar Zoom meetings on regular basis over the next few weeks, so folks can get on and practice. If anyone needs, I will send out an invitation for a volunteer portal training. I meant to do that before this meeting, and I apologize for not doing that. Dennis has been gracious enough to offer to provide that training. That's where our DIY presentations live. So if you're going out to do, for example, a presentation on Social Security or caregiving and want the most updated presentation, you'll have to go to the volunteer portal to do that. I believe most of you are familiar, but it's always good to have a refresher. Obviously, going on the portal for submitting expenses is a little different than going on the portal to download a PowerPoint. So I will send that invitation out, and then we'll recap this meeting as well. But excited for everybody to be here. Thank you for taking the time today. Again, thanks to Lenore for joining our little Tennessee crew. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to reach out to Dennis or Byron or myself directly, and we'll be happy to help.
Very good. Thank you all so very much.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you.
Have a great
Bye-bye.
day.
Thank
Bye.
you,
Rob,
everyone.
Bye now.
Rob, can you hang off?
Bye,
Take care.
everyone. Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much.
Hello, sir.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I should stop recording.